focus on today is what is happening in the livable centers moving forward. A little bit about the concept of livable centers, though. I'm assuming you know, but in case you don't, H-GAC is the regional metropolitan planning organization for transportation in the counties that you can see behind the trees on this graphic. A lot of times we get questions about, well, we're talking about investing in pedestrian facilities. Is that really a project of regional significance? And I would say probably not. To talk about a sidewalk of regional significance, to my mind, is a bit of an oxymoron. So how do we achieve greater regional share of pedestrian trips? By doing it in a lot of places, a lot of short trips. And so far in the areas that we've done livable center studies, we estimate that almost 450,000 purpose pedestrian trips, that's not walking the dog or just taking a constitutional, purpose pedestrian trips are made per day in those areas. So that stacks up pretty well with a big freeway corridor, even though it's not all happening in one place. And you can imagine in your own mind people running errands in the tunnels downtown, lab tech walking across a skywalk in the mid-center to deliver some results. If those businesses were located isolated on a freeway frontage road somewhere, those business trips would likely be maybe several miles of single occupant vehicle travel. So in the aggregate, I think working on these small scale projects is really the only way to go to improve the pedestrian share. We think it's been a pretty cost effective approach. If I could working before. So, a brief reminder, what are livable centers? Basically, we're looking at places that can fulfill these three criteria: compact and mixed use. Unlike perhaps a corridor study, a livable center is more of a orbital zone of travel where people can get to a lot of different places within walking distance. The mixture of use is obviously if we have a combination of businesses, both like office employment or services for those employees or residents, the greater number of those so-called purpose trips can occur on foot, on bike, or via transit. They need to be walkable. I hope that's not just a buzzword, but walkability encompasses a number of different things. One is, of course, that there's good, safe sidewalk and crosswalk facilities. But also, walkability has to do with how are the buildings oriented up to the street? Is there shade? Is there other comfort factors for the pedestrians? And do we have the kind of block structure that enables people to get around where they need to go without necessarily having to go a mile spacing to make a turn and get to their next destination? The way we really leverage the concept of livable centers, though, is when we connect it and make it accessible to what I would call our alternative transportation networks, such as our transit system or such as our bikeway network. So without getting too precise about definitions of size or scale of livable centers, we want them to achieve these different metrics. And we want to make targeted strategies that make sense for the place where they're going. And I show these two examples because I think a lot of times when we talk about a livable center, and if I've described, compact, mixed use, walkable, connected, and accessible, we might think of a place like Midtown. That comes to a lot of people's minds when we're talking about a walkable, livable center. How many of us would think of Airline Drive as a place like that? But it is in terms of people making purpose pedestrian trips. Now, I don't fault any of the developers or transportation engineers who put together the facilities on Airline Drive, because when that was going strong in the 50s, it was a different sort of a place. But now with the confluence of all the flea markets that occur there, on the weekends, it's probably one of our higher volume pedestrian areas. So we need to be able to adapt the Livable Centers concept to fit the place where it's going. We think we've been pretty successful in getting that concept right in some pretty diverse locations. And I'll just go counterclockwise on this. Downtown Houston, the narrowing and making more pedestrian friendly of the Avenida de las Americas. Have any of you been there? Since it's been narrowed and pedestrianized, that was a recommendation in the Livable Centers study we did in that area, and I would say, judging by the usage I've observed, pretty successful. The Cypress Creek, that's not a real project yet, just FYI. That's an imagined redevelopment of a part of the Cypress Creek Parkway, formerly FM 1960. If we could create an oasis of walkable urbanism up in that area, some ideas of what that could look like. Downtown Rosenberg, how do we capitalize on a place that has historic building stock, existing grid, is in the middle of one of our fastest growing counties? Or Cashmere Gardens in Northeast Houston, where really the focus has not been so much on how do we get more redevelopment, new development in, but how do we make our streets and sidewalks and crosswalks more conducive to safe travel for the many people who are already walking in that community today. So we really want to make sure that the plan is the right plan in the right place. I think we've been pretty successful in having a diversity of study areas. So far we have completed 25 Livable Centers studies, and those are in sort of the ochre colored or mustard colored dots there. And you can see that about half of them are in central Houston, and about the other half are in places as far-flung as Hempstead or Rosenberg, as I mentioned, Taebel. And then the purple denotes study areas that we are either just getting underway or will kick off sometime within the next year. Now, some of you may also think, gee, that's going to be 30 of these. Isn't that about enough? I'll just give you a comparison. The Atlanta Regional Commission, where we borrowed, did I say that? One of the nice things about working in the public sector is they want you to steal their ideas. So Atlanta was really the original MPO on this Livable Centers concept. They've done 112 of these studies so far. So again, if we're really going to get this pedestrian travel to scale, it needs to be at a scale comparable to the size of our region and give people a lot of different choices in terms of geographic area and price points and types of places. Just to give you a little bit of background on what's involved in Livable Center study, we can work with a city, we can work with a county, we can work with a management district and other entities that are eligible to sponsor Texas Department of Transportation projects. So we can't work with a nonprofit or directly with a private business, but most political subdivisions are eligible. We undertake a competitive call for proposals. We did the last one about 2 years ago. We're hoping to be out with the next one for the next 2-year period, probably later this month. The average cost of these projects is about $200,000. They've ranged from $100,000 to, I think, $350,000 was the highest. That is 80% federal, which comes through H-GAC's Transportation Improvement Program funds. And then the sponsor is required to pay 20% local match plus the fees that are associated with doing the project through TxDOT. And the money does not go to the entity itself. H-GAC serves as the project manager, but we seek to involve the client or the sponsor in this case very much in terms of determining the scope and in selecting the right consultant team for their needs. And as I said, the scope, we want to keep it pretty open because as you saw in the examples I gave, we have very, very different sorts of study areas, but we do insist that these 4 things are in every study. We have what I would consider to be a very robust public engagement process that looks at residents, business owners, property owners, elected officials, as well as other public agencies that are in this study area. We represent that once these plans are done, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody what the recommendations were. They've been thoroughly vetted by the community and other decision makers. Second aspect is we want the plans to be visionary, but we don't want them disconnected with market reality. So we definitely want to see that there is market demand. For Steve is smiling at that one. There is some market demand for the concepts that are going to be discussed. And then finally, what does that new development concept look like? And on top of all that is these being transportation funds, after all, are the specific transportation improvements with at least rough cost estimates and benefit estimates. So we view that as sort of the last thing. Let's look at what the community wants. Let's look at what the market is saying. Let's look at how that would integrate into a broader plan. And then let's propose transportation facilities that would help serve that plan. Again, just a few examples of what's in these, and I'm doing about a 30,000 foot level on this. Midtown was really interested in looking at what sorts of pedestrian circulation and development could fill in. They view that area in northwest Midtown by the Post properties where I showed the slide, all the residential up there, and the HCC campus sort of on the east side, and then the Main Street Red Line transit zone is a bit disconnected. Maybe the whole is a little bit less than the sum of the parts. I think they called that the Z or the Zorro concept in that figure on the upper right. But how can we make that happen, stitch this community together in a place where we've got some good, safe pedestrian corridors and access to that transit, an emerging transit-oriented zone there on Main Street. Downtown, we actually did the study in combination with the Downtown Management District and the East Downtown Management District. They were really looking at, how can we facilitate pedestrian movements to these main activity centers here in the area. We've got convention centers, we've got sports facilities, we've got multiple transit lines, we've got this emerging Edo shopping and entertainment corridor. And are there some improvements we could imagine that would help synergize all those, pardon the cliche, but such that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts? And as I said before, if you haven't been down to the reconfigured street in front of the convention center, I was down there a few weeks ago on a Saturday night with no game in town, and people don't think folks will come down to downtown Houston on a Saturday night. Check it out. Not just big city projects, though. One of the ones that is nearest and dearest to my heart is the small community of Waller, which really looked at reconfiguring their original downtown area and also providing some options should commuter rail ever be a reality in that corridor. How could we create some walkable nodes around multiple potential rail station sites in Waller? More on Waller a bit later. So, about 8 years in, what's happened? Last March, we did a comprehensive survey of all of our study area sponsors. We also conducted some of our own research, just looking at development and job and property value trends. And I will tell you, we were surprised by the results. So far, our project sponsors have reported completing almost $200 million worth of improvements. This is just public sector capital improvements and parks and open space. This doesn't include private development and other amenities, and have reported that another almost $275 million are planned and programmed for future years. And I had the privilege of being at that the ribbon cutting for the first East End sidewalk improvement, which was really the first project out of the box in our Livable Centers program. And I'm going to get back to this point a little bit later too. The importance of persistence. A lot of times there's a little bit of an impatience after a plan is developed that, well, what happened? I thought we had that Livable Centers thing and had a bunch of meetings and I didn't see anything. Well, it takes a while, particularly if projects are going to be developed with federal funding. The long-term lead time of getting ready to even compete for that funding is significant. But the East End, I think, has probably been first in line as far as staying the course and being very aggressive in pursuing funding both through H-GAC and other federal grants, as well as investing the resources of their own management district. And again, if you have not been down to the Navigation Esplanade since it has been redone, I would encourage you to do that, particularly when there is a festival or something else going on down there. Perhaps at the other end of the spectrum, another one of my favorite Livable Center studies is the Near Northwest Management District. And they're really working, I said they're all orbital, but that is a little bit larger study area that focuses, among other places, along the Antoine corridor. And they realize that while they're getting their capital projects all lined up, they could do some very short-term things to create more of a buzz and a branding in that area. So they took over the old, is it the Inwood Forest Golf Course, made that their headquarters, created a branding campaign to both show where the district, the heart of the district is, as well as bus stops and the like. They created a butterfly garden. I don't know how the Frisbee golf course is coming along, but those were a little bit lower initial capital cost projects to get the residents and other potential investors jazzed about what was going on there. Upper Kirby, how many of you have been to Levy Park? Okay, pretty nice stuff. But they began actually with some projects along Kirby Drive and some other streets. Now Levy Park is open to the public, significant new development around there, and I think we're beginning to maybe envision, Kirby as being our, I don't want to say the wrong thing here, another Post Oak Boulevard type of a place. Really the vision of Upper Kirby, I think, in the public's mind in the surrounding area is really changing. I don't have precise figures on the level of private investment in the Livable Centers, but I will offer you just the shots I've snapped in the past year or so along the first two on the left are along the Red Line in Midtown, and new loft development in Edo, the new Marriott Marquis in downtown. And as a surrogate for private investment, I will offer you this slide series. So we looked at the property value increase. This is from Harris County Appraisal District from 2009 to 2014 in Harris County, and then the Livable Centers within Harris County. It was a little hard to get a apples to apples comparison with the ones in the other counties, so the next few slides will just be on Harris, but you see the Livable Center study areas grew in value considerably more so than did Harris County as a whole. Compare it to some other geographies, even more so than the area between 610 and Beltway 8. And I'll just talk about that donut for a minute there. I think that is really going to be a challenge for this region and the agencies that are looking forward, because the inner loop has seen a lot of reinvestment. There's a lot of interest in that more urban living, and there's tremendous growth and interest in suburban living, and particularly the master plan communities and other developments further out. That area in between 610 and Beltway 8 is not blessed with the sort of street grid and some of the other iconic amenities that exist inside the loop, but it also doesn't have large tracts of land that can be configured as master plan communities, and some of that is aging a little bit. And so I think really understanding how to consider and retrofit some of those areas is really going to be key. And that's why I'm very happy that 3 of our next 5 Livable Centers studies that are coming up are going to be located in that donut. But even versus the inner loop, Livable Centers are outperforming if we look at property value increase as the measure. Now, a couple of thoughts about this, because I also understand that this is a two-edged sword. Whoops. That's, the authorities smoked me out on that. Very controversial.
Apparently.
Okay, Greg, you got me. The fact that these areas are attractive to new development and are undergoing a lot of increased property values, I think is a good thing. Whether or not we take credit for it through our program, I think it at least suggests that we're putting this planning in the right place where there is development interest. I will also say that if we wind up pricing people out of livable centers, that is not going to be a sustainable program. It's not going to be a program that really serves the needs of our community or our region. And I think increasingly, going forward in the studies, we're going to have to think, along with thinking beyond just livable centers, in what sorts of affordable housing policies and strategies can we employ to make sure that walkable access to transit and jobs is not just in high-end redeveloped areas. And I don't know that any of us have the answer for that just yet, but I will say when you look at the map again, if we get it back up, I think we've done a good job of putting these in some different parts of town, and I hope if you look through the studies that have been completed, you will agree that we've been sensitive to the context and the desires of the community. So as I noted in Cashmere Garden, I don't think they're really interested in a lot more new redevelopment. They have a lot of non-motorized trips already in there, so that's going to be a little more infrastructure focused than perhaps some of these other areas. So I've always felt like it was good to be able to give a presentation that includes a lot of maps and figures just in case the system goes out. So I'm going to try to wing it, and then we can see how well I did. The other thing that was very interesting in looking at the appraisal data is how much of the new development that's occurred since 2009, when the program started, occurred on either a redeveloped site or an infill site versus greenfield. And again, I just compared it to Harris County for simplicity's sake. And I believe that in the livable centers, the number for residential property was about 90% on a redevelopment or an infill site, about 45% Harris County wide. Why is that important? Most, not all, but most of the livable center study areas have an existing street grid or existing street system. They have existing infrastructure underground. Now, some of that may need to be upgraded, but the increment of taxable valuation versus new infrastructure cost is a very good ratio if we do more infill and more redevelopment. I also recall from memory from my slideshow that Greg will get back up soon that the unit split is about 75% multifamily or attached units to 25%. And I don't recall offhand what it is in Harris County, but we are building more multifamily housing, more compact living arrangements in the Livable Center study areas than we are in the county as a whole. Now again, that's not to suggest that everybody needs to be living in higher density. What I think is important though is if the only places you can really do the mixed use walkable or Upper Kirby or Midtown or those higher end new developments, then we are going to have an equity issue, we are going to have an affordability issue. I think if we do a wide range of livable centers in a lot of places, we'll eventually sort out price points for the same product, just based on land costs, based on market demand in those areas. When we say, you know, these walkable urban developments are so much more expensive than the region as a whole, well, we've got, you know, 2 million single-family units and 1 million some multifamily units all over the place, all different ages, all different price points. We don't have that kind of variety yet. And to really get a healthy market, it needs to be bigger. And so that's our hopefully not self-serving idea of putting a lot more of these out here are really going to help the market take care of settling out to what the buying public can afford. The other thing we looked at was job creation in the livable centers. Oh, now I get to fact check myself.
Maybe. I messed up your slide, but.
Whoops. Okay, so how to do? Not bad. Residential, either redevelopment or infill, 45% in Harris County, 90% livable centers. Non-residential, 45 to 67. And then I was a bit off, I see, on the single-family multi-mix, 29.1 to 70.9 versus about 65-35 in Harris County. And then the final thing we looked at was job growth. And again, this is maybe a little bit of an apples and oranges, but that we were able to compare in the 8-county region to the 25 livable center study area boundaries. And not massive job growth difference, but again, thinking about the aims we have for this program, we know that those jobs are in places that do permit, if nothing else, midday walk trips for business purposes, some residential to work and residential to services trips, and those can be jobs in a big hotel like in the Nassau Bay Town Center, or they can be little retail jobs along 2920 in Taebel. But again, where people like to walk, where they can get to easily with transit, we feel is also a good economic development strategy. And this is not a numerical metric, but I was happy to see last year when Houstonia magazine talked about the top 20 or top 7 spots to live in 2020 and beyond. I noticed that 6 of those were in, I'm sorry, math is bad. 5 of the 7 were in areas that have a livable centers plan. Antoine Corridor.
Yeah, we pass that out all the time.
Good. So, I don't want to falsely sell this. I've been pretty good doing the sales pitch, but there are some things that have to be in place for this to succeed. And I'll fully confess, we have some livable center studies that not much has happened in those areas. I'm going to tell you what I perceive as the difference between the ones that have succeeded and the ones that are a little bit slow getting off the ground. Probably goes without saying, but there has to be a champion for the project. And that can be an elected official or a business or community leader. I will say that the ones that we've worked on with management districts that have really taken this vision and made it their own have tended to be a little bit farther ahead than ones that, okay, we got this plan and somebody take a look at that. See what we can do. A few examples of that in a minute. Second thing that I'll also get to in a minute is flexibility. One of the things that I sometimes hear when we talk about planning is, well, we don't want to be tied down to a plan. Markets change, condition changes. We don't want you to be tied down to a plan either. All of the Livable Centers plans that I've seen that are doing things, the project looks a little bit different than it is in the rendering. Maybe it's significantly different, but those folks on the ground tasked with implementation are trying to achieve the broad ideas. So anybody who tells you these plans are limiting, I view them more as a place to start in thinking about implementation and organize our thinking. And like I said before with East End and others, persistence. It is 8 years after we finished that study, you can really walk around there and see some things are pretty different. Downtown I think was 6 years ago, but you can walk around there, see it's different. So understand that these things do take some time. Just a couple examples that warm my heart. So East End took the Livable Centers plan, typical planners type map, really made it into their business visitors marketing map. So you've all seen the maps with all the local businesses and attractions. So they took that from the Livable Centers, made it their marketing piece. Energy corridor. How could you have a Livable Centers out on I-10 corridor? Well, they're looking at redeveloping the Addicts Park and Ride into a livable transit center. They're actually marketing to developers to make that project happen, right in the heart of an otherwise very linear, not interloop type district at all. And then finally, the Waller Main Street, I was visiting, is John Ison here today? I was visiting with him a few months ago, and he said, this rendering we had for our new town square, that's all off now. But what he did was he actually hired some other consultants to really take a look at it, do the math, do the logistics on the engineering. So they didn't abandon the concept, they just reoriented what it would be. And so you sometimes don't know in a short planning process what's really feasible. But I think that the people on the ground who are willing to stick with it and make those changes but still keep the concept alive will be well served in the future. Another thing I'd like to just mention here that we produced last year is this thing called the Instant Impact Guide. Some of you may have heard this term as tactical urbanism. Sounds like a little bit of an inaccessible term to me, but whatever you prefer. But really we're looking at, are there some ways that we can get stuff out on the ground much sooner after the plan is developed, or maybe even as part of the development of the plan, to demonstrate to residents and businesses what these improvements could look like. So the lighter, cheaper, quicker, stuff that you could really just set up with some people in their trucks, basically, that you could get down in a weekend, and it doesn't cost too much, but really is a way to test ideas. Can we put a pop-up up? Can we put a fake bike lane in? Could we take a moving lane out and envision what it would be like if we had a park or a broader shoulder in there. And that lets the residents basically get to see how well they like it, kick the tires on it, if you will, before the community has to pony up for capital investments or perhaps embark on a controversial path to, let's say, narrow a road. And we've so far had one demonstration project out of our livable centers that I know of anyway, and that was on the Washington Avenue project, where they really transformed that street for a weekend. And I would say that this is not so much rolling the stuff out, but also what the Sunday Streets program is trying to do, just allow people to experience these corridors not moving by in a car, see what they could imagine. And then, of course, once you get it built, use it. And I think many of our communities and some others that didn't do livable centers with us, but still have a place like that, that becomes a great public gathering place. But it also helps educate people about, hey, maybe I'd like one of those closer to where I live as well. So that's our progress to date. As I said, we hope to be coming out with a call for new study partners sometime around the end of this month. You can find all the Livable Center studies, the Instant Impact Guide, and the Implementation Report on our website. And I would be happy to take any questions. Annette.
You mentioned the airline study.
Yes.
Up front. Has there been any progress on that?
Let's see, is Terry here? I think there have been a couple of sidewalk and a crosswalk improvement on there, because I went to ribbon cutting, but I don't remember exactly where they are.
As you mentioned, you have multiple livable centers popping up here and there. As that begins to sprawl, your studies also include connectivity, so mobility connectivity from those different livable centers to either hubs of employment or even from themselves. So your studies also incorporate that side.
Yes, I failed to mention one of the screening criteria we have in the projects is access to multiple modes of transportation. So obviously either fixed guideway or bus lines if it's on a bikeway, but that is not a pass-fail requirement, because I also think there are places like Waller, Fulshire, where transit may be, or better transit may be someday, that we wouldn't want to exclude from the process. So it's a difficult balance, but yes, that is one of the factors we use in evaluating studies. Augie.
Do you already have the criteria
If they're not, we'll get them up. I think it is up somewhere, but I can't tell you exactly where it is on the website. And when we send out the call for studies, they'll be re-included in that as well.
On the website, there's something that says you can be notified of future RFPs. There's a place to sign up on it.
Yes, good. Council member.
Well, I didn't realize there were so many of them here. That's wonderful. I was real interested in your comments about the competitive proposals going out later this month. Could you talk a little bit more about that? How long will it be before they're due, or how many will you be selecting?
Well, this all is yet to be approved by everybody here, but it's all go by last time, and if we don't change it a lot, it should be similar to that. I think we have a 3-month time frame from the notice to the due date, and last year we did 6 studies. So the way that works is the proposals are submitted and evaluated by a team from H-GAC, as well as I think we invite TxDOT and some of the past study partners, and then they make a recommendation to the Transportation Policy Council on how many of those warrant funding, and then they may select none or all. So last time they selected 6. So I think that just to be safe, looking at a 3 to 5 ballpark with about a 3-month response if we get that out before the end of this month. I'll make 2 other notes. We require a letter of support from both the sponsoring jurisdiction that the matching funds will be there. We also require a letter of support from the Texas State Representative for the area. And within the city of Houston, the city itself has its own vetting process for all projects. So the city wants to just be in the loop on the front end before we recommend any project.
Suggestion, you may want to recognize that's Councilmember Carlos Cisneros, and she is a city councilwoman from Houston. So I think it's great that you're here for the planners workshop. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Patty, and forgive my oversight, but we're very pleased to have you here, Councilmember Cisneros. And have I omitted any other elected officials? Next question.
Has there been qualitative analysis into if there have been more people who use the area that work and live there? Is there any analysis to kind of evaluate if it has become more livable?
We have not done such analysis. The question was, has there been any follow-up analysis to see if there are more people who live and work there? Although, Commode, do we have any surrogate measures of live-work that we could employ? Oh, the question was, do we have any sort of a follow-up survey that analyzes whether more people do indeed live and work in livable centers than before the livable center?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at it historically, so the same comparison of 2040.
Yes, I think we could probably recreate that with the census travel data, and that's a good idea, so thank you. Other questions?
Are rating systems like sites or envision being considered to be integrated systems or not?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Rating systems like envision and sites, are they considered as part of the livable center studies or not?
Did you say drainage systems?
Rating systems.
Rating systems like
There is one called sites.
site?
The other is envision or infrastructure planning.
No. Would you describe what is in those?
Yes, sites is for development of sustainable sites. So it accounts for all resources that go into developing an existing site. Envision is a little bit broader. It goes into planning impacts of infrastructure development.
Okay. Well, I'm not familiar with those. I will say that we have it's not a totally sustainable site tool, but we do have something called the Activity Connectivity Explorer, which looks at people, jobs, and intersection density. And we don't make that a threshold requirement in evaluating the studies, but we do look at it on the back end. Again, I'm sometimes a little bit concerned about having a threshold that might exclude, let's say, a Waller from the discussion. It may not do so well on some of those metrics, but I think the opportunity, so I think we look more qualitatively at the proposal of, is there a chance to have this possible small town commuter walkable environment that might override, whether their site characteristics today might not seem that promising. Yes, Patty.
Have we been able to use the TPC and the TAC to help prioritize implementation dollars, whether it's a roadway improvement, and I'm not going to pick on anybody, but how this street in the Waller Livable Centers that could help implement it. The streets are generally the most expensive part versus the street in ABC town that's not in the Livable Center and doesn't have the same weighting. Is there any extra funding for Livable Centers in our implementation ranking for the TACIA?
Well, you get extra credit if it is part of a plan, but I guess, and I think, and Patrick or anybody who knows, I think we have right now a 10% cap on what are called mobility alternatives, which includes Livable Centers, Ped Bike, and some discretionary transit funds. Did I miss anything?
I think that covers pretty much.
So I am now speaking as just Jeff speaking to you here. I think for people interested in increasing funding for Livable Centers, the place to start on that is maybe not looking at raising that cap. I think it's looking at raising demand. And I think that if the TPC sees evidence that there is broad demand from local governments for these facilities, and that the same level of effort in terms of developing the project and then advocating for the project is exhibited as it is for the roadway project, we'll get there. But right now, I think there sometimes is this tendency of, we haven't really seen this groundswell of demand for that, so why should we increase the size of the bucket? So I guess that was one of my points in the program is, if we start really developing these projects and doing some of the front end work to get them ready for a tip call, I think we'll have success with it.
So just to follow up on your comment about, is there a way to quantify, did somebody move there that also worked in the energy corridor? That might not be a bad follow-up metric for applications that are successful every year. Just ask Clark or ask Edo or ask if they can, and they can probably do this so easy nowadays with technology. If they can tell us how many people live and work in that sphere of Livable Center area since that project has been started. I know Midtown, and you can almost intuitively know that Midtown has been its own success, but some of these are smaller geographies and don't have the employment, but I'm assuming the energy corridor will have that success.
Well, I think, like I said, we can look at that with the census data and stay tuned.
If y'all don't have any more questions, I'll dismiss y'all so you can get back to your jobs. But first of all, I'd like to thank Jeff for his very interesting presentation.